In the hush of a winter night, where snowflakes whispered secrets to the frozen earth, a single heartbeat defied the eternal silence of the immortal realm. Ilara Voss had always been a woman forged in the crucible of loss. At 32, born in the shadowed valleys of the Carpathian Mountains to a lineage of healers who traced their roots to forgotten herbalists, she carried the weight of abandonment like a second skin. Her mother had vanished into the mist when Ilara was 12, leaving behind only a locket etched with a thorny rose, a symbol of fragile beauty amid thorns. Orphaned young, Ilara had poured her shattered spirit into medicine, becoming a doctor in the remote villages of Eastern Europe, where the line between life and death blurred under endless winters. Her trauma lingered in the fevered nights when she awoke gasping from dreams of blood-soaked snow, her deepest desire a quiet redemption, to save one life that mirrored her own unspoken grief. Disillusioned by a world that prized survival over soul, she wandered now through a blizzard, her coat heavy with frost, cradling her poisoned son against her chest. Little Theo, just 5, his tiny body limp and burning with the venom of a rare toxin she'd failed to identify, administered, she suspected, by the jealous rivals in her village who whispered of her unnatural cures. The wind howled like a lament, tearing at the hem of her woolen scarf, its fibers rough against her chapped skin. Snow clung to her lashes, each flake a cold kiss that stung like regret. She trudged onward, her boots sinking into drifts that swallowed her steps, the world reduced to a monochrome haze where the moon hung low, a silver sickle mocking her desperation. Theo's breath came in shallow rasps, his forehead slick with sweat beneath the fever's grip. "Hold on, my love," she murmured, her voice a threadbare prayer lost to the gale. The poison coursed through him like shadowed rivers, twisting his innocence into something fragile and fleeting. Ilara's mind raced with formulas and forgotten lore, nightshade antidotes, elderberry elixirs, but nothing pierced the veil of this malice. She had been broken before, abandoned by lovers who fled her intensity, left her to raise Theo alone after his father's betrayal. Now, illness clawed at her boy, and despair wrapped around her heart like velvet chains. Far from the village's flickering lanterns, the ruins of an ancient castle loomed on the horizon, its spires jagged teeth against the storm. Legends spoke of it as the seat of forgotten kings, where the wind carried echoes of oaths sworn in blood. Ilara had dismissed such tales as peasant superstition, but exhaustion blurred the line between myth and necessity. Shelter was her only hope now. As she crested the final rise, the snow parted like a curtain, revealing the castle's iron gates, wrought with motifs of wolves and thorns, entwined roses frozen in metal, their petals sharp as memory. A gust rattled the chains, and for a moment, she swore she heard a distant heartbeat, not her own, pulsing through the stone. Inside the courtyard, the air grew still, as if the storm respected the threshold. Ilara pushed through the gates, her arms aching from Theo's weight, and collapsed against a pillar overgrown with ivy, its leaves brittle under ice. The child's whimpers faded into silence, and panic surged like bile in her throat. She laid him on the flagstones, her hands trembling as she checked his pulse. Faint, erratic, a butterfly's wing beat against oblivion. Kneeling in the snow-dusted marble, she rummaged through her satchel for the last vial of morphine, its glass cool and unyielding. But as she uncorked it, a shadow detached from the archway, tall and cloaked in midnight. He was no man of her world. King Draven Thorn, eternal sovereign of the shadowed clans, had ruled these lands for centuries. His immortality, a curse woven from a choice made in the fires of a long-ago war. At what mortals would call 500 years, he appeared no older than 35, his frame lean and commanding, clad in a greatcoat of black velvet that absorbed the moonlight. Born human in the turbulent courts of medieval Wallachia, Draven had been a warrior prince, marked by the guilt of a battlefield betrayal, slaughtering his own kin in a bid for power, only to be cursed with undeath by a dying sorceress's spell. Solitary now, he wandered the castle's halls, haunted by the faces of those he'd failed. His ethics a fragile armor against the bloodlust that simmered within. He sought no companions, for every bond ended in dust, yet his deepest desire burned, redemption through an act that proved his soul untainted. Ethical to a fault, he fed only on the willing or the wicked, his loneliness a vast, echoing chamber where guilt echoed like footsteps in the night. Draven's eyes, the color of storm-tossed seas, fixed on the intruders. The scent of mortality flooded his senses, warm blood pulsing faintly beneath pale skin, laced with desperation and a child's fading light. He stepped forward, his boots silent on the stone, the air around him carrying the faint metallic tang of ancient iron. "You trespass in a place of shadows," he said, his voice a low rumble, resonant as thunder trapped in velvet. Elara startled, shielding Theo with her body, her gaze defiant despite the fear coiling in her gut. Up close, Draven's presence was overwhelming, skin like polished marble, a faint scar tracing his jaw like a silver vein, and eyes that held the weight of forgotten eras. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice cracking like thin ice. He tilted his head, studying her, the lines of exhaustion etched around her eyes, the thorny rose locket glinting at her throat, mirroring the gate's design. It stirred something ancient in him, a recognition of symbols that bound fate. "One who knows the taste of poison," he replied, his tone measured, laced with a sorrow that surprised even him. Theo stirred, a weak cry escaping his lips, and Draven's composure fractured. The boy's scent was pure, unmarred, a beacon in the storm. For the first time in decades, the king felt the pull of something beyond survival, a moral crossroads where indifference warred with an inexplicable urge to intervene. Ilara's mind rebelled against the impossibility of this stranger, rationalizing him as a hermit, a mad noble surviving in ruins. Yet his gaze pierced her, seeing the fractures in her soul, the abandonment, the disillusionment that made her cling to healing as salvation. "My son." "He's dying," she whispered, the words tearing free like a confession. Draven knelt slowly, the snow crunching softly under his weight, and extended a hand, not to take, but to offer. The wind died, leaving only the distant drip of melting ice from the eaves, and in that suspended breath, their worlds collided. He could save the boy, but at what cost to his eternal isolation? As his fingers brushed Theo's brow, cool as moonlight, Elara felt the first shiver of inevitability, an attraction resisted, born not of flesh, but of shared shadows. The castle's candles flickered to life in unseen drafts, casting golden pools that danced across the stone, illuminating the thorny rose etched into Draven's signet ring, a twin to her locket. Theo's breathing steadied, if only for a moment, and Elara's heart stuttered. What choice would this night demand of them both? Draven's touch lingered on Theo's skin, a chill that seeped like mercy into the fever's blaze, buying time against the encroaching dark. Elara watched, transfixed, as the stranger's hand withdrew, leaving no mark but a subtle easing in her son's labored breaths. The courtyard, once a tomb of silence, now hummed with subtle life. The crackle of distant flames within the castle, the soft patter of snow melting from the arches. Draven rose, his silhouette framed by the moon's pale glow filtering through cracked, stained glass, reds and golds bleeding into the white drifts like wounds in the night. He was no savior from folklore, she told herself, just a man with hidden knowledge, perhaps a physician exiled for unconventional arts. Yet his eyes held depths that whispered of eternities, and the air around him carried a faint, coppery warmth, like blood warmed by an unseen fire. "You should not have come here," Draven said, his voice weaving through the chill like smoke. But there was no threat in it, only a weariness that mirrored her own. He turned, gesturing toward the castle's yawning doors, where candlelight beckoned like forbidden promises. Ilara hesitated, her arms tightening around Theo, the weight of him an anchor against the pull of this enigma. Broken by years of solitude, her village's whispers branding her a witch for her successes, her heart scarred by a husband's flight, she had learned to trust only her hands and her will. Yet desperation clawed at her resolve. "If you can help him," she said, rising unsteadily, "name your price." Inside, the great hall unfolded like a memory of grandeur decayed, vaulted ceilings lost in shadow, walls draped in tapestries frayed by time, depicting hunts under thorny crowns. Candelabras stood sentinel, their flames steady against the draught, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and wax, undercut by something primal, earth after rain, mingled with the subtle iron of hidden veins. Draven led them to a chamber off the hall, its hearth roaring to life as if summoned by his presence. Velvet cushions sagged on carved chairs, and a long oak table bore dusty decanters of wine that gleamed like rubies in the firelight. He laid Theo on a fur-strewn divan, the boy's face slack but no longer ashen. Ilara knelt beside him, her fingers tracing the locket at her throat, its thorny rose pressing into her skin like a talisman. Draven moved with deliberate grace, retrieving a vial from a concealed alcove, crystal-etched with the same rose motif, its contents swirling like liquid moonlight. "This will neutralize the venom," he explained, his tone clinical, yet laced with an undercurrent of reluctance. "But it demands a toll." As he administered the dose, drop by drop onto Theo's tongue, Ilara felt the room tilt. The poison's grip loosened, color returned to the child's cheeks. Relief flooded her, warm as the hearth's glow, but it warred with suspicion. Who was this man, alone in ruins, versed in toxins that stumped her expertise? Draven stepped back, his scar catching the firelight, a silvery reminder of battles long faded. Guilt had carved him hollow. Centuries of watching mortals crumble, his ethical code a barrier against the hunger that twisted immortals into monsters. He had chosen eternity, not for power, but to atone, every life spared a brick in his redemption. Yet this woman and her son stirred echoes of his lost humanity, a dangerous temptation. "The poison was nightbloom extract," he said softly, meeting her gaze. "Rare, derived from thorns that bloom only under full moons. Your enemies chose it well." Ilara's breath hitched. The village healer's rivalry, the anonymous threats, they crystallized into malice. "How do you know?" she pressed, her voice a whisper of accusation. He turned to the window, where snow lashed the panes like frantic fingers, the glass rattling in protest. "I have seen it before, in times when such poisons were weapons of kings." His words hung heavy, philosophical undercurrents rippling beneath, the fragility of life, the illusion of control. Ilara rose, drawn closer despite herself, the space between them charged with unspoken questions. She rationalized the pull, gratitude perhaps, or the shared solitude of outcasts, but his proximity brought a sensory tide. The cool aura of his skin contrasting the room's warmth, the faint rhythm of no heartbeat, only an eternal stillness that both repelled and intrigued. As Theo slept peacefully, Ilara explored the chamber, her fingers trailing over an ornate mirror framed in blackened silver. Its surface rippled like frozen water. In its reflection, she saw not just her weary face, but Draven's form beside her, his eyes reflecting a depth that swallowed light. "You carry a mark," he observed, nodding to the locket. She touched it instinctively, the metal warm from her skin. "A relic from my mother, lost to me like so much else." Their eyes met in the glass, and for a moment, the world narrowed to that shared gaze, human fragility meeting immortal isolation. The love that flickered there was resisted, a spark rationalized as alliance, yet inevitable as the dawn. But as the fire popped, sending embers spiraling, a shadow passed the window, eyes gleaming in the night, watching. Draven tensed, his hand drifting to the dagger at his belt. The poisoners had followed, their intent darker than snow. Ilara clutched Theo closer, the thorny rose locket digging into her palm, drawing a bead of blood. What secrets did this castle hold, and at what cost would safety come? Shadows lengthened in the firelight, but it was the unseen eyes beyond the glass that cast the longest chill across the Eternal King's resolve. Draven moved like liquid night, positioning himself between the window and the divan where Theo slumbered. The child's chest rose and fell in steady rhythm now, the vial's elixir weaving its quiet miracle through his veins. Ilara felt the shift in the air, a thickening, like fog rolling in from the mountains, carrying the acrid tang of pursuit. Her heart pounded, a mortal drumbeat echoing in the vast chamber, where the tapestries seemed to stir with phantom winds. She had always been the healer, not the hunted, but disillusionment had taught her the world's cruelties, the village elders who envied her skills, the whispers that painted her as cursed since Theo's birth. Abandoned by all but her son, she now faced the storm she'd fled, its fury embodied in those glowing eyes outside. "Stay with him," Draven commanded, his voice a silken thread of authority, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of concern, for her, unbidden. He slipped toward the door, his greatcoat swirling like raven wings, the signet ring on his finger catching the candle's glow, its thorny rose etched deeper in the light. Ilara nodded, gathering Theo into her arms, the fur beneath them soft as a grave's lining. The room's textures enveloped her, the velvet's plush embrace, the hearth's crackling warmth licking at her skin, the distant howl of wind against stone, a symphony of sanctuary under siege. Outside, the snow had thickened into a veil, muffling the crunch of boots on the courtyard gravel. Draven descended the spiral stairs, his senses attuned to the night's pulse. 3 heartbeats, ragged with intent, laced with the sweat of malice. The poisoners, village outcasts perhaps, or cultists versed in dark arts, had tracked her scent through the blizzard, their motives twisted by superstition and greed. He emerged into the storm, the gates creaking open as if welcoming judgment. The figures huddled, cloaked in rough wool, their faces obscured by hoods, but their eyes burned with fanatic zeal. "The healer and her whelp," one hissed, voice slicing through the gale. "They carry the blight we must end." Draven's presence halted them, a wall of unyielding shadow. "You pursue what is under my protection," he stated, his tone laced with the gravity of centuries, philosophical weight underscoring the threat. The folly of mortals meddling in forces beyond their span. The leader stepped forward, brandishing a thorned vial, night bloom, its glow malignant. "She defies the old ways. The child is marked." A ritual choice loomed here for Draven. Reveal his nature and terrify, or let ethics guide a subtler redemption. The clash was swift, sensory in its brutality. Wind whipped cloaks like flags of surrender. Snow stung like needles as Draven disarmed the first with a blur of motion, his strength immortal yet restrained. Fists met flesh with dull thuds, blood blooming warm against the cold. Mortal crimson, spilling onto white purity. Ilara, peering from the hall's threshold, heard the fray, grunts echoing off stone, the snap of bone, the wet gasp of a final breath. Her stomach churned, the scent of violence drifting in on the draft, metallic and raw. Introspection gripped her. Had her healing provoked this? Was her broken life a curse passed to Theo? Draven returned, unscathed but for a fresh smear of blood on his cuff, his eyes shadowed with the weight of necessary violence. "They will trouble you no more," he said, closing the door with a resonant thud. Ilara searched his face, seeing not triumph, but a deeper solitude, the guilt of one who had spilled life to preserve it. She rationalized the attraction blooming in her chest, gratitude for his protection, nothing more. Yet it tugged inevitably, a thread connecting their wounds. Theo stirred, murmuring in sleep, and she smoothed his hair, the locket's thorns pricking her anew. As dawn's first gray light pierced the windows, painting the room in hues of faded gold and icy white, Draven poured wine from a decanter, its aroma rich and spiced, offering her a goblet. Their fingers brushed, a spark of texture, cool eternity against warm mortality, and in that touch, dilemmas unfurled. He spoke of choices, life as a fleeting gift, eternity as a burdensome mirror. Alara listened, her disillusion cracking under his compassionate gaze, the thorny rose symbol binding them in silent poetry. But as the storm abated, a raven perched on the sill, its cry a harbinger. Whispers from the village would spread, drawing greater shadows. What transformation would this fragile alliance demand? And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. Dawn's tentative light filtered through the casements, but it was the raven's shadow that foretold the unraveling of veils long cherished in silence. Alara sipped the wine, its velvet depth coating her tongue like forbidden solace, while Theo slept on, his small form a bastion against the encroaching uncertainties. The chamber held its breath, the fire's embers glowing like dying stars, casting flickering patterns on the walls where tapestries depicted thorny gardens entwined with eternal vines. Draven stood by the hearth, his profile sharp as a blade, the bloodstain on his cuff darkening like an accusation. He had saved them, yet the act stirred his ancient guilt, a reminder that even ethical immortals bore the stains of violence. Solitary for eons, he had built walls of isolation, but this mortal woman's presence chipped at them, her broken spirit echoing his own unspoken longing for connection. "You fight like no man I've known," Alara said, setting the goblet down with a soft clink, the sound resonant in the quiet. Her voice carried the texture of exhaustion, roughened by the night's trials, yet laced with an emerging curiosity. Disillusioned by betrayals, her husband's abandonment, the village's scorn, she had armored herself in rationality, dismissing the supernatural as myth. But Draven's prowess defied explanation, his cool skin brushing hers in memory like moonlight on water. He turned, eyes meeting hers across the room, the distance charged with unspoken resistance. "Some battles leave marks that time cannot erase," he replied, touching the scar on his jaw, its silver line a map of regrets from wars where he chose eternity over death. She rose, drawn to the mirror once more, its rippled surface capturing her reflection fractured, the thorny rose locket dangling like a pendant of fate. In it, Draven appeared behind her, not as intruder but as counterpart, his form steady where hers wavered. The air between them hummed with sensory intimacy, the faint creak of floorboards under his step, the subtle scent of pine and iron clinging to him, the warmth of the fire contrasting his chill aura. Alara's mind rebelled. This was survival's illusion, not affection. Yet the pull deepened, inevitable as the tide. Theo awoke then, his eyes wide with wonder rather than fear, reaching for Draven with a child's unfiltered trust. The king hesitated, his hand hovering, the signet ring glinting, a symbol of his cursed reign. Kneeling, he allowed the boy to grasp his finger, the touch a bridge across divides. "He sees no monster in you," Alara observed, her tone softening, philosophical threads weaving through. The purity of innocence against the shadows of experience. Draven's expression cracked, revealing the loneliness that gnawed at his immortality. "Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die," he murmured, the words a confession drawn from depths. He spoke then of his origin, not in full, but fragments, The Wallachian courts, the betrayal that birthed his undeath, the ethical vow to protect rather than destroy. As midday light strengthened, gilding the room in old gold, they shared a meal from the castle's hidden stores, bread crusty with age, cheeses sharp and preserved, fruits dried like preserved memories. The textures grounded Alara, the crunch of loaf, the tang on her tongue, Theo's laughter bubbling like a spring. Yet suspense coiled beneath. The raven returned, tapping insistently, its beak clutching a scrap of parchment, a warning from the village scrawled in hasty ink. The healer harbors darkness, the child must burn. Draven's face hardened, the fire reflecting in his eyes like inner tempests. A choice loomed: flee the castle or confront the growing threat, risking exposure of his nature. Alara felt the dilemma echo in her soul: abandon her old life, or drag this enigmatic protector into her broken world. As they prepared to venture out, the snow paths cleared by unseen hands, she touched the locket, its thorns a reminder of lost mothers and budding bonds. The love resisted, rationalized as alliance, burned brighter. But as they stepped into the waning storm, footsteps echoed from the tree line. More pursuers, drawn by rumors of the immortal king. Draven's hand found hers, cool and steady, and in that grasp, transformation whispered. The raven's warning fluttered to the snow like a fallen leaf, but it was the footsteps in the distance that quickened the pulse of both mortal and eternal hearts. Ilara's grip tightened on Theo's hand as they emerged from the castle's embrace. The midday sun struggling through clouds to paint the landscape in muted silvers and grays. The air bit crisp, carrying the scent of pine resin and freshly turned earth beneath the drifts, a deceptive calm after the night's fury. Draven led the way, his stride purposeful yet vigilant, the greatcoat billowing like a banner of shadowed resolve. His guilt simmered anew, the parchment's words a mirror to his own damned existence, where protection invited peril. Ethical to his core, he had shielded many in solitude, but this family stirred a redemptive fire, tempting him toward vulnerability. Theo skipped ahead, his recovery a miracle that lightened Alara's steps, though worry etched her features like frost on glass. At 32, her traumas layered deep. The mother's disappearance, a symbol of abandonment that fueled her disillusion. The village's isolation, branding her skills as sorcery. Her desire for stability clashed with the supernatural undercurrents now swirling around Draven, his timeless gaze, the effortless strength that saved her son. She rationalized the warmth in her chest as maternal relief, resisting the deeper intimacy that bloomed in stolen glances, inevitable as the sun's arc. They trekked toward a hidden glen where Draven's lore promised a sanctuary grove, ancient oaks twisted like guardians under thorny canopies. The path wound through ruins, crumbled chapels and vine-choked arches, where light filtered in shafts, illuminating motes of dust like wandering souls. Sounds layered the journey, the crunch of snow underfoot, Theo's delighted gasps at icicles like frozen spears, the distant call of the raven circling above. Alara's senses heightened, the textures vivid, bark rough against her palm as she steadied Theo, Draven's occasional brush of arm cool and electric. In the glen, a circle of stones stood, moss-covered and etched with runes resembling thorny roses, the air humming with latent power. Draven knelt, tracing a symbol in the frost, and the ground warmed subtly, steam rising like breath. "Here, the old magics linger," he explained, his voice a cadence of introspection. "A place where choices echo." He revealed more of his past, the sorceress's curse, a ritual of blood and oath that bound him to undeath, his solitary quest for atonement through mercy. Alara listened, seated on a fallen log, the wood's grain pressing into her like whispered secrets. Philosophical dilemmas surfaced, life's brevity versus eternity's weight, love as both curse and salvation. Theo played nearby, fashioning a crown of thorns from nearby brambles, his laughter a counterpoint to the gloom. Yet suspense built. The footsteps grew nearer, shadows flickering at the tree line. Draven rose, alert, as figures emerged. Village enforcers, armed with torches and vials, their faces twisted in righteous fury. "The king's ghost walks!" one shouted, firelight dancing on their blades. A confrontation ignited, sensory and raw, flames hissing against snow, shouts clashing with Draven's commanding presence. He fought with restrained fury, disarming without killing, his ethics a guiding star. Elara shielded Theo, her heart torn. Flee or stand. In the chaos, a torch singed her sleeve, the heat searing like judgment, and Draven pulled her close, his body a shield. The touch lingered, resisted no longer in the heat of peril, awakening a bond that transcended reason. As the attackers retreated, battered but alive, the glen fell silent, save for the raven's approving croak. Draven turned to her, eyes stormy with unspoken confession. "This path leads to shadows deeper than night. Will you walk it?" The thorny rose locket warmed against her skin, a symbol of choices unfolding. Transformation beckoned, but so did the invisible hand of death, hovering near. Flames died in the snow, leaving only steam and echoes, but the true fire kindled in the spaces between guarded hearts and eternal vows. The glen exhaled as the last attacker vanished into the woods, their retreat a fragile truce bought with Draven's mercy. Ilara's breath came ragged, the acrid smoke clinging to her clothes like a shroud, mingling with the earth's damp musk. Theo clung to her leg, his earlier play forgotten, eyes wide with the world's harsh edges. At 5, he sensed the undercurrents without words, his innocence a light piercing the gathering dusk. Elara stroked his hair, her own illusions cracking further, disillusion with her village's hatred now compounded by the allure of this immortal protector. Broken and abandoned, she had rebuilt herself through healing, yet Draven's presence unraveled that armor, the attraction no longer deniable, though she rationalized it as shared survival. Draven sheathed his dagger, the blade's edge catching the fading light, its hilt engraved with the recurrent thorny rose, an emblem of beauty's peril. His scar seemed deeper in the twilight, a testament to guilts that eternity could not wash away. Solitary king of shadows, he had chosen undeath to escape death's finality, but now faced a redemptive crossroads. Draw this mortal family into his world, or sever the bond before it cursed them. Ethical restraint warred with longing. Every immortal was once human, fragile, and choosing. They pressed on to a concealed cottage at the glen's edge, its thatched roof blanketed in snow, walls of weathered stone exhaling warmth from a hidden spring. Inside, the space was intimate, a hearth of river rocks, shelves lined with herb bundles and ancient tomes, candle stubs melted into waxen pools. The air tasted of lavender and iron, textures enveloping, furs soft underfoot. A kettle simmering with herbal brew that steamed like sighs. Elara settled Theo by the fire, his eyelids drooping as she sang a lullaby from her Carpathian childhood, notes low and haunting, weaving through the crackle of logs. Draven watched from the shadows, his cool gaze tracing her form, the curve of her neck, the resolve in her hands. "You carry strength in your suffering," he said, stepping closer, the floorboards groaning softly. She met his eyes, the space between them alive with tension, the faint chill radiating from him, the warmth of her skin flushing in response. Philosophical introspection flowed, the beauty in human pain, how it illuminated the soul where immortality dulled it. Elara shared fragments of her trauma, the locket's loss, her desires for a life unbroken, resisting the intimacy, yet yielding to its inevitability. Their hands met over a shared cup, fingers intertwining, the thorny rose ring pressing like a vow. Night deepened, stars pricking the velvet sky visible through a small window, their light cold and distant. Suspense built with a knock at the door, a lone villager, not foe but informant, bearing news of a gathering mob, fueled by tales of the cursed king harboring witches. Draven's face shadowed, a ritual choice crystallizing, reveal his nature to Elara, risking her flight, or let love's curse unfold in secrecy. As thunder rumbled afar, rain mingling with snow, Elara confronted him. "What are you, truly?" The air thickened, candles guttering, and in that suspended breath, Draven's confession hung, immortal, bound by blood, seeking redemption in her light. The bond deepened, tragic and redemptive, but the mob's torches flickered on the horizon, drawing near. If this story has already captured you, leave a like. It helps the voices of those who chose eternity reach more hearts. Stars wheeled overhead like indifferent witnesses, but it was the approaching torches that ignited the fragile bridge between worlds. Rain lashed the cottage windows, turning the world to a blurred watercolor of grays and flickering oranges from the mob's advance. Elara stood frozen, Draven's partial confession echoing in the humid air. Immortal, a king of night, his existence a tapestry of choices that blurred life and shadow. Theo slept undisturbed, cocooned in furs, his breaths a steady counterpoint to the storm's rage. Elara's mind reeled, rationalizing the impossible, hallucinations from exhaustion, or perhaps a deeper truth in the legends she'd dismissed. Her broken heart, scarred by abandonment and illness's theft, now faced a love that promised eternity, yet reeked of curse, resisted fiercely, yet blooming inevitable in his compassionate gaze. Draven paced the narrow room, his presence a sensory storm. The subtle shift of air as he moved, cool and charged, the faint scent of rain on ancient stone clinging to him. His guilt deepened with each revelation. Ethical solitude had preserved him, but vulnerability now threatened all. The thorny rose ring twisted on his finger, a symbol of pains that bound rather than severed. "I was born to rule, but cursed to endure," he said, voice low and resonant, philosophical layers unfolding, the tragedy of memory unending, the redemption sought in mortal bonds. Outside, the mob's chants swelled, muffled by the deluge, accusations of sorcery, demands for the healer's blood. Elara barred the door, her hands trembling, the wood's grain biting into her palms like thorns. Textures assaulted her, the kettle's steam beating on her skin, candle flames bowing to drafts, Theo's warmth a fragile anchor. Draven pulled her aside, into the alcove shadowed by shelves, their bodies close, his chill seeping through her damp clothes, igniting a fire of conflicted desire. "Choose now," he urged, eyes locking with hers. "Flee with your son, or stand with me in this shadow." The dilemma tore at her. Mortality's fleeting joys versus the transformation he offered, subtle hints of a shared eternity. Introspection gripped as thunder shook the walls. Her traumas, the locket's weight, the beauty and suffering that mirrored his guilt. Love coexisted with fear, redemptive yet tragic, as she traced his scar. The touch electric, rational barriers crumbling. The door shuddered under fists, splintering wood releasing the mob's fury. Draven moved like mist, opening it to face them, his form silhouetted against the storm. "Return to your hearths," he commanded, voice booming with immortal authority, halting them in awe. No blood spilled, his presence alone, laced with subtle compulsion, dispersed the crowd, leaving only muddied tracks and silence. Elara emerged, heart pounding, to find him unchanged, yet the night's intimacy had shifted them. Theo stirred, sensing the calm, and reached for Draven, who lifted him gently, the scene poignant under the eaves drip. As rain eased to mist, they prepared to return to the castle, the bond solidified, a Dampier's whisper in the air, though unspoken. But in the mud, a discarded vial gleamed, nightbloom, potent and renewed. The poisoned shadow lingered, promising greater trials. What price would redemption exact in the heart of the storm? Silence followed the mob's retreat, heavy as the mist that cloaked the cottage, but it was the vial in the mud that poisoned the air with unspoken dread, its shards whispering of cycles unbroken and fates entwined. Ilara's fingers closed around the remnants of the night-bloom vial, the jagged glass biting into her palm like the thorns of her locket, drawing a thin line of blood that welled warm and crimson against the chill dawn. She knelt in the churned earth, the mud sucking at her knees with a wet, insistent pull, its cold seeping through her skirts like regret's slow creep. The cottage door hung askew, splintered timbers framing the scene like a broken threshold between worlds, her mortal fragility and Draven's shadowed eternity. Theo, still drowsy from the night's upheavals, toddled over, his small boots splashing in puddles that mirrored the gray sky above, his eyes wide with a child's unfiltered curiosity rather than fear. At 5, he had already tasted the edge of death's blade, yet his recovery painted him in resilient light, his cheeks flushed not with fever, but with the simple joy of morning. Ilara pulled him close, inhaling the clean scent of his hair, milk and earth, shielding him from the vial's malice, her heart a tumult of disillusion and dawning resolve. Draven approached, his boots silent on the sodden ground, the greatcoat draped over his shoulders, absorbing the mist like a living shroud. His presence altered the air, carrying the faint, metallic tang of restrained power, a cool aura that contrasted the warming sun's tentative rays piercing the clouds. At what mortals deemed centuries old, he bore the weight of his immortality like an invisible crown, forged in the fires of Wallachian betrayals where ambition had twisted into curse. The scar along his jaw caught the light, a silvery vein pulsing with memories of blades and oaths, his ethical solitude a fortress against the guilt that gnawed eternally, lives spared, yet shadows lengthened by his mere existence. He crushed the vial's shards further under his heel, the crunch resonant like bones yielding, his eyes, storm-deep and ancient, meeting Ilara's with a compassion that belied his nature. "This poison is no accident of men," he said, his voice a low cadence, resonant as wind through castle ruins, laced with philosophical gravity. "The recurring folly of mortals invoking dark arts to mimic the immortal's burdens. It ties to rites older than these woods, woven from the same thorns that bind my kind." She rose, wiping the blood on her sleeve, the fabric rough and damp against her skin, the sting a sharp reminder of her humanity's vulnerabilities. Disillusion had long been her companion, abandoned by a husband who fled her intensity, isolated in villages that revered, then reviled her healing gifts, her mother's vanishing a wound that echoed in Theo's near loss. Yet Draven's revelations stirred a deeper fracture. The rational barriers she had erected against the supernatural now crumbled under the weight of evidence, his unyielding strength, the way shadows seemed to part for him. The attraction she felt was no fleeting spark, but a resisted tide, rationalized as gratitude for his protection, yet inevitable, blooming in the quiet spaces where their gazes lingered. The thorny rose locket at her throat warmed inexplicably, its etched petals mirroring the signet ring on his finger, a recurrent symbol threading their fates like veins of fate. They gathered what remained, her satchel of herbs, now sodden and scattered, a few provisions from the cottage's hearth, loaves hardened by the night's damp, and set out through the mist-veiled woods. The path wound like a serpent, ancient oaks arching overhead, their bark textured with moss that clung damp and spongy, dripping condensation like tears onto the leaf-strewn ground. Sounds enveloped them, the patter of rain's remnants on branches, Theo's footsteps splashing in shallow streams, the occasional cry of the raven wheeling above, its black form a harbinger etched against the paling sky. Draven walked beside her, his arm occasionally brushing hers, cool marble against her warmth, sending shivers that were equal parts chill and electricity. Conversation unfolded in cadenced rhythms, intimate as confessions in a confessional, He shared fragments of his past, the Wallachian courts where silk and steel mingled, the sorceress's ritual that bound him to undeath, not through savagery, but a desperate choice to endure and atone. "Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die," he murmured, his words hanging in the mist like incense, philosophical depths exploring the tragedy of endless memory versus the beauty of mortal ephemerality. Ilara responded in kind, her voice textured with the gravel of exhaustion, revealing desires buried deep, a life where healing transcended loss, where abandonment yielded to unbreakable bonds. Theo scampered ahead, collecting acorns like treasures, his laughter a bright counterpoint to the gloom, yet suspense coiled in the air. The raven's insistent caws, the subtle shift of branches suggesting unseen watchers. As the castle's spires emerged through the trees, jagged silhouettes against the climbing sun, a figure materialized at the gates, cloaked and hooded, not in threat, but tentative truce, bearing the insignia of village elders, a crude thorned emblem that twisted Ilara's gut. Within the great hall, sanctuary unfolded in layers of decayed opulence. Vaulted ceilings lost to shadow, walls adorned with tapestries frayed at the edges, depicting eternal hunts under thorny crowns that seemed to writhe in the candlelight. Draven commanded the space with quiet authority, lighting candelabras that bloomed flames in golden pools, their wax scent mingling with the stone's ancient chill. The messenger, a weathered elder with eyes hollowed by fear and cunning, knelt on the flagstones, their chill seeping through his robes. "The poisonings stem from an old feud," he confessed, voice trembling like leaves in wind. "Tied to your bloodline, Shadow King. Nightbloom was forged in vampiric rites, stolen to purge what we fear, the healer's light drawing your darkness." The revelation hung heavy, a ritual unmasking, the village's malice rooted in legends of Draven's clan, where immortality's curse had spilled into mortal wars, thorns symbolizing the blurred line between redemption and damnation. Ilara's dilemma crested like a wave. Embrace this fragile accord, returning to a world that had poisoned her son, or fully step into Draven's eternal shadow, where love promised transformation, but at the soul's peril. As the messenger departed, his footsteps echoing down the corridor like fading heartbeats, Draven led her to the mirror chamber, its walls lined with ornate frames of blackened silver, surfaces rippled like frozen waves capturing fractured truths. Candles guttered in drafts, casting elongated shadows that danced across the glass, illuminating their reflections. Her form, weary yet radiant in the fire's glow. His, timeless and cool, a counterpart in the dance of light and void. He drew her close, the air between them thickening with unspoken vows, the faint creak of floorboards under their steps a heartbeat in the silence. Her hand traced the scar on his jaw, the skin smooth as polished stone, yet etched with history's weight, while his fingers, long and elegant, brushed the locket, the metal yielding warm to his touch. Resistance melted in that proximity, the sensory intimacy overwhelming. The subtle chill of his breath on her neck, like mist-kissed marble. The velvet texture of his coat against her palms. The distant drip of melting snow from the eaves, punctuating the moment like hesitant applause. Their lips met then. Not in haste, but in poetic inevitability, a kiss that tasted of spiced wine and iron-laced eternity, sensual without vulgarity, lips parting in a slow exploration that awakened dormant fires. Textures layered the embrace, the soft give of her warmth yielding to his unyielding form, hands entwining where ring and locket aligned, thorns pressing like shared burdens. The love ignited fully, redemptive in its tragic vessel, pain transmuted to passion, isolation to union. Yet as they parted, breaths mingling in the candle-lit haze, a cry pierced the air from the hall. Theo, playing nearby, had collapsed, his small body seizing with a deeper recurrence of the poison, hidden in his veins like a serpent's lingering bite. Draven's face drained of color, not from frailty, but dread's immortal grip, his eyes storming with the weight of choices. The ritual loomed larger now, a transformation to bind them, sharing essence without death's claim, birthing a Dhampir legacy in the crucible of love. Ilara's heart stuttered, the mirror reflecting not just their forms, but the precipice where mortality bowed to eternity's call. The castle's mirrors reflected not just forms, but the precipice of choices where love and eternity danced on the edge of oblivion, their steps etched in light and lingering shadow. Theo's fever surged back with merciless precision, his small frame convulsing on the divan in the great hall, skin glistening with sweat that beaded like dew on fevered petals. Ilara dropped to her knees beside him, the flagstones unyielding and cold through her skirts, their chill a stark counterpoint to the blaze radiating from her son's body. Her hands, calloused from years of tending the ill, pressed against his forehead, hot as forge embers, while she rummaged in her satchel for salves now rendered futile by the poison's insidious depth. The air thickened with urgency, laced with the acrid tang of his distress and the faint herbal residue of her failed remedies, the scent clinging to her like a shroud of inadequacy. At 5, Theo's innocence amplified the tragedy. His whimpers fragmented into gasps, tiny fists clutching the fur blanket as if to anchor against the tide pulling him under. Ilara's voice broke in a soothing murmur, a Carpathian lullaby woven from her childhood's fragments, notes low and trembling, carrying the texture of wind through mountain pines. Yet despair clawed at her throat, disillusion yielding to raw maternal terror. Draven materialized at her side, his movements fluid as mist, coalescing, kneeling with a grace that belied the storm in his eyes. The scar on his jaw seemed to pulse in the candlelight, a silver thread connecting his ancient guilts to this present peril. Centuries of ethical restraint, solitary vigils over mortals' fleeting lives, now fracturing under the weight of attachment. His immortality, chosen in Walachia's blood-soaked courts to evade death's finality, had preserved him but isolated his soul. Redemption had always been a distant horizon, sought through mercy rather than conquest. Yet here, in the healer's light and the child's purity, it crystallized into action. "The night bloom hides layers," he said, his voice a resonant timbre that cut through the chaos, philosophical undercurrents rippling like hidden currents, the beauty of suffering as catalyst, where human fragility illuminated eternity's voids. He extended a hand, palm upturned, revealing a vein traced with faint luminescence, the essence of his undeath, not a weapon, but an offering. The chamber transformed under his subtle command, an unseen draft summoning additional candelabras from alcoves, their flames igniting in synchronized bursts to bathe the space in a warm, golden haze veined with crimson shadows. The walls, draped in faded velvets of deep burgundy and black, absorbed the light, creating an intimate cocoon where textures reigned. The divan's furs soft and yielding under Theo's thrashing, the oak table nearby scarred with age, its grain rough like whispered histories. Ilara met Draven's gaze, her own eyes, framed by lashes clumped with unshed tears, reflecting the dilemma's depth. Her traumas layered like sediment, the abandonment by her mother, symbolized in the locket's thorny embrace, the husband's betrayal, leaving her to forge a solitary path of healing, the village's scorn, now manifest in poison's bite. Disillusion had armored her, but love's inevitability, resisted through nights of rational denial, now demanded surrender. The attraction had evolved into profound union, a Dhampir bond shimmering unspoken, romantic in its fusion of mortal warmth and immortal depth. "This rite binds without breaking," Draven explained, his tone compassionate yet shadowed, guiding her through the ritual's poetry. He pricked his wrist with a silver dagger, its hilt engraved with the recurrent thorny rose, petals curling like protective wards, drawing a slow rivulet of blood that gleamed like liquid moonlight, metallic and vital. The scent bloomed subtle, copper laced with an undercurrent of ancient earth, not repulsive, but sacred, evoking the texture of life distilled. Elara hesitated, the air humming with latent power, sounds layering the moment. Theo's labored breaths syncing with the candle's soft crackle, the distant rumble of settling storm clouds outside, her own heartbeat thundering like a mortal drum in the eternal quiet. Philosophical introspection gripped her, the interplay of death as invisible companion, now yielding to choice's redemptive arc, love as both curse and salvation, transforming pain into transcendence. With trembling resolve, she accepted the chalice he offered, a crystal vessel etched with runes, cool against her lips as she drank. The essence cascaded through her, a sensory symphony. Initial chill blooming to liquid fire in her veins, textures of frost and flame intertwining, pain sharp as thorns, yet laced with ecstasy's velvet pull. Her vision sharpened, the room's details vivid, the flicker of flames dancing on velvet, the subtle shift of Draven's form as he chanted in an archaic tongue, words rolling like thunder trapped in silk, vibrating through her bones. No vulgarity tainted the act. It was sensual poetry, intimate as lovers' vows, her hand finding his across the divide, fingers lacing where ring and locket aligned, thorns pressing into flesh like shared stigmata. As the transformation took hold, a subtle shift, not full undeath but a Dhampir awakening, granting her straddled existence between worlds, Elara turned to Theo. Her touch, now infused with the rite's power, cooled his brow, the poison recoiling like shadows from dawn. She administered the mingled essence drop by drop, watching color flood his cheeks. His convulsions easing into peaceful slumber, breaths steadying to the rhythm of renewed life. No death claimed them. Instead, the air shimmered with possibility, a family forged in eternity's forge. Elara's bond with Draven deepened into romantic eternity, human-tethered yet unbound by time's decay. Dawn breached the ancient windows, shafts of light streaming in hues of pale gold and rose, gilding the hall in renewal's embrace. The village's threats, quelled by Draven's subtle nocturnal influence, whispers of awe replacing fear, faded into irrelevance, leaving the castle's ruins a sanctuary reborn. Elara cradled Theo, his head resting against her chest, while Draven's arm encircled them both, his cool presence a steady anchor. The thorny rose symbols, locket, ring, etched in stone, bloomed anew in their shared gaze, emblems of suffering redeemed, choices echoing into forever. Yet in the profound quiet, as embers glowed like distant stars, a whisper lingered from the mirror's depths. Eternity's paths twisted onward, shadows ever dancing at the edges, awaiting the next tempest to test love's enduring light. Love had not cursed, but liberated, tragic in its trials, redemptive in its triumph, a testament that even the damned could find mercy in mortal souls. Subscribe if you believe mercy can resurrect even the damned.